we got as far as dividing the characters up into these pieces, and then we said, let's go ahead and name them according to Star Wars. And we made a little list here. And in this little list, we said protagonist, antagonist. Down the list, we had reason in this order. Reason, emotion, okay, sidekick, skeptic, guardian, and contagonist. And we said, who are they in Star Wars? And what we concluded by looking at some video clips was that the protagonist was indeed Luke Skywalker, and that the antagonist was actually the Empire, represented by the Grand Moff Tarkin and all of his stormtroopers. Reason was Leia, as mentioned earlier tonight. Emotion is Chewie. Sidekick was the robots, although at the beginning of the story they have a larger role because there's a sub-story at the beginning when Darth Vader comes out and appears to be the antagonist, and only later do we see that he's really just a henchman. Contagonist does not mean henchman, although the contagonist is often cast as the henchman because they end up hindering both sides. And it's Darth, in fact, let me put him down here, Darth, who is the one who comes up with the plan for putting the homing beacon on the Millennium Falcon and letting them go, so he screws his own guys. And he's also the one who uses the Force on that other general or admiral or whatever around the table, and he's screwing his own guys as well as hindering the people that they're on the good side. And he's, of course, the dark side of the Force when Obi-Wan is the good side of the Force. And so they're kind of opposite in their approach, and that's why the two of these guys have to have it out at the end. It's important that they meet because they're really archetypically antithetical. Okay, and finally we have the skeptic, who, as we mentioned, is Han Solo. Now, that worked fine for Star Wars, but would it hold true for other stories? So we decided to look at the Wizard of Oz. And we said, does it hold true in Oz? And this is close to as far as we got last week. We said in Oz, Dorothy is like Luke. She's a clear protagonist. And the sidekick is Toto. And also, the skeptic is the lion, cowardly lion. Now, we might think cowardly is emotional. Actually, being cowardly doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with emotions. You might be cowardly because you figured out, reasonably, that you're going to get killed and think it's not a good idea. The skeptic, which is the lion, saying, no, we better turn back. We shouldn't go into the enchanted forest. We'll never be able to rescue Dorothy. You know, that's the lion. He's the skeptic. Now, the guardian is Glinda in Wizard of Oz, and that's pretty clear, but now we have 4 places left over that we had a little trouble with. We said, what are we going to do here with the last 4 characters? And the characters we have are the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, the Witch, and the Wizard. We said, well, it would seem first that we'd want to make the Witch the antagonist, because the Witch is the bad character, the villain, but then we said antagonist doesn't necessarily mean villain, so let's look at what the antagonist is. The antagonist had the traits of saying, reconsider, and also of trying to prevent or oppose. Well, clearly the antagonist, the witch, in Wizard of Oz, does try to prevent or oppose, prevent or avoid Dorothy from going back to Oz with those, out of Oz without those slippers. She tries to kill her. That's about as much prevention as you can muster up, is to kill someone. That's why it's a very good way of encoding, in most stories, a simple way of encoding, that is the antagonist, because they're trying to kill you. Okay, it's a very simple way to encode. But they could just be trying to prevent whatever you're after. Now, with that in mind, we look at the reconsider part. The antagonist tries to force people to reconsider, and we get a little bit of a sense of that, but there's something missing. It's not just a reconsideration. Let's look over at the wizard. The wizard would not be reason or emotion. We are pretty clear that that has to be some combination of traits with the Tin Man and the Scarecrow, because we just get a feel for them that way. We look at the wizard and say, is the wizard the contagonist? Well, the contagonist has to be the tempting force and also has to be the trickster who screws you up. When does the wizard screw them up? He plays a trick. He's not really a wizard, but he doesn't actually screw them up. He doesn't actually hinder them. In fact, he's the force of reconsideration that we see up here with the antagonist. The wizard actually represents the force of reconsideration and also the temptation to just take the easy way out of Oz and never discover that there's no place like home. So in fact, The wizard gets both of the internal traits. This is all new material now. The wizard gets both of the internal traits. He gets reconsider, and he also gets temptation. And in so doing, we have a purely internal character, which is why the wizard doesn't show up physically through much of the story. The wizard doesn't have to be there because he's merely the internal side of the argument. The witch, on the other hand, is all over the place in the story. And why? Because she gets both of the external traits. In other words, if we took the antagonist and the contagonist as archetypes, broke them up into their individual traits, and then put both of the internal ones and gave them to the wizard, Wiz, and we gave both of the external ones to the witch, she now is not only trying to prevent Dorothy from achieving her goals, but also she now has this force of hinder that we have here, which is the internal trait of the external trait, I'm sorry, of the contagonist. These two traits are now both external, prevent and hinder, which is why you'll see her throwing a fireball down to slow them up, or doing something like the poppies or the enchanted apples, which aren't really designed to kill anybody, but just screw with them, okay? That's what the hindering character does. So she has a lot of physical presence, unlike the wizard, who doesn't, because he's got both of the internal traits. So, in learning about how these other elements below archetypes can go together to create more complex characters, one of the first things we learn is that characters might be archetypes but then swap things so that one got both of the internals and the other one, in exchange, got both of the externals. Then we have something else going on. We've got a different kind of swapping that we discovered in Wizard of Oz. It made it very useful that we went there first, because we were able to see this right after Star Wars, and it became very clear and formed, again, another beachhead into an understanding of how characters and stories really work. The reason character is controlled, and in addition to being controlled, they use logic. That's what Leia is. But who's the controlled character in Wizard of Oz? Well, clearly it's the Tin Man. He's so controlled he's made out of tin. He walks like a robot. Externally, he's very controlled. But internally, does he use logic? No. He's the one who has the emotions. As a matter of fact, he cries so much that he rusts himself. What an interesting image. His emotions cause him to cry and rust his controlled exterior. It's a beautiful image created here. On the other hand, over here on the part where we see Chewie, this is where we look at the Scarecrow and say, well, clearly the Scarecrow is a very emotional character. They're all over the place. Are they? No. The Scarecrow is a character who is logical. Logical? The Scarecrow? Yes. He's the one who hasn't got a brain, but he's the one who makes all the clever comments. He's the one who comes up with the plan to rescue Dorothy. He's the one who says, I'll show you how to get apples. He's the thinking one. So he gets the logic part of Leia, and he gets the uncontrolled part of Chewie. Okay? So you might say that that the Tin Man over here, who gets the external controlled part, okay, of Leia, and inside gets the emotional part of Chewie, that the Tin Man is Leia on the outside and Chewie on the inside. Pa-dum-bum. So there's another kind of swapping that can go on. In this particular case, each one still has an internal and an external trait, unlike before. But now, they have swapped the internal compared to the external and done something. Let me see where we are on camera here. Hello, come up screen. Okay, there we are. If you take them like this and say, there's internal matching internal and external matching internal, so each has an internal and an external, and you swap them. They still each have an internal and an external, but now they don't have the internal that matches the external. They're no longer archetypal, because they have changed their internal arrangements so that they don't have the inside working in parallel, in conjunction, as a reflection, the inside and the outside. They don't resonate anymore, they dissonate.